The New St. Joseph Baltimore Catechism, Lesson 5, The Creation and the Fall of Man. Man is a creature composed of body and soul, and made in the image and likeness of God. This likeness to God is chiefly in the soul. In Genesis it says, God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply. However, the image is found chiefly in man's soul, since that is a spirit just as God is a spirit. The soul is like God because it is a spirit having understanding and free will, and it is destined to live forever. The first man and woman were Adam and Eve, the first parents of the whole human race. The chief gift bestowed on Adam and Eve by God was sanctifying grace, which made them children of God and gave them the right to heaven. The other gifts bestowed on Adam and Eve by God were happiness in the Garden of Paradise, great knowledge, control of the passions by reason, and freedom from suffering and death. Great knowledge, Adam and Eve had knowledge poured into their minds by God. They did not have to study or go to school. Passions are emotions in the soul, such as anger, fear, hatred, desire, joy, sorrow, etc. Adam and Eve would not become angry unless they wanted to. They would never be afraid of anything unless they wanted to. They would never cry unless they wanted to. There would be no sickness, weakness, weariness, or bodily discomfort. They would not have to go to the dentist or take any medication or go to the hospital. When they finished their time on earth, they would go to heaven without dying. That was the initial intention. But God gave Adam and Eve the commandment not to eat of the fruit of a certain tree that grew in the Garden of Paradise. It was not a real fruit, but a symbol of some pleasure God forbade them, to test their love for Him. Adam and Eve did not obey the commandment of God, but ate of the forbidden fruit. On account of their sin, Adam and Eve lost sanctifying grace, the right to heaven, and their special gifts. They become subject to death, to suffering, and to strong inclination toward evil, and they were driven from the Garden of Paradise. Number 1, God's command, do not eat of the tree of good and evil, lest you die. God loved Adam and Eve and wanted to keep them from harm. Number 2, the devil's temptation. If you eat this fruit, you shall be as gods. The devil, symbolized by the serpent, said, Don't love God, love yourselves. Be your own gods and do your own will. What God says is too difficult. Number 3, the fall. Adam and Eve disobeyed God and did their own will, followed their own desire. Number 4, the punishment. The gate to heaven was closed. Adam and Eve lost their gifts, and they lost the friendship of God. On account of the sin of Adam, we, his descendants, come into the world deprived of sanctifying grace and inherit his punishment, as we would have inherited his gifts had he been obedient to God. This sin in us is called original sin. This sin is called original because it comes down to us through our origin or descendant from Adam. The chief punishments of Adam inherent through original sin are death, suffering, ignorance, and a strong inclination to sin. God is not unjust in punishing us on account of the sin of Adam, because original sin does not take away from us anything to which we have a strict right as human beings, but only the free gift which God, in his goodness, would have bestowed on us if Adam had not sinned. God's gift to us includes grace, great knowledge, control of passions by reason, and freedom from sickness and death. The devil's gift to us include original sin, ignorance, a strong inclination to sin, and suffering and death. Now, the Blessed Virgin Mary was preserved from original sin in view of the merits of her divine Son, and this privilege is called her Immaculate Conception. You see, Mary was born without this original sin. That's what we mean by the Immaculate Conception. When she was in her mother's womb, she was immaculately conceived, cleansed through God's grace and sanctifying grace, removing that original sin. Our Lady's words to Bernadette at Lourdes is, quote, "I am the Immaculate Conception." Our Lady is so different from us. We have sin, but she did not. But she feels very sorry for us. The healing waters of Lourdes are a sign of her love for us and her desire to help us in our troubles. The Immaculate Conception in prophecy. God did not abandon man after the sin of Adam and Eve. He promised that the devil's victory over Adam and Eve would be turned into a defeat. He promised to send a Redeemer who would at the same time come from mankind, so that through this Redeemer, man could truly conquer the devil. And as the devil had conquered through a woman, Eve, so would God conquer through a woman, Mary. One day there would come a woman who would be completely the devil's enemy, over whom he would have no power at all. Through her seed, or child, she would crush his head. This is why we see so many pictures of Mary with a snake under her feet. She is the woman promised by God to be the devil's terrible enemy. Meanwhile, the human race was under the power of the devil. Everyone born into the world had original sin on his soul, and was therefore a slave of the devil. Even those who did die without mortal sin on their souls could not enter heaven, but had to wait in what we call limbo, called Abraham's bosom by Christ in Luke 16, and a prison by Peter in 1 Peter 3, until after the death of Christ. Men could not understand why there was sickness and suffering on earth, and did not know what happened after death. God did not send the Redeemer right away, so that men would see from all these things what a terrible thing sin was, and how much they needed a Redeemer. When the fullness of time had come, God prepared to send his Son into the world as the Redeemer. He had already planned the kind of mother he wanted for his Son. So he created her soul and united it to her body in the womb of her mother, St. Anne. But Mary's soul, unlike all other souls which had come into this world after Adam and Eve, had no original sin on it. It was immaculate. God looked into the future and saw the day on which his Son would die on the cross. He accepted in advance the precious blood of his Son as the price of Mary's redemption. He used the precious blood to redeem her ahead of time by preserving her from all sin. This privilege which God granted to Mary of being conceived and born without original sin is called her Immaculate Conception. As a result of her Immaculate Conception, Mary came into this world full of grace and was never under Satan's power. She was the only one, except for Christ, whose soul was always turned perfectly toward God's will. Her immaculate heart was always full of perfect love for him. She was completely the devil's enemy and prepared for the warfare with him, which was to result in his complete defeat. By her surrender to God's will, she was ready to reverse the defeat mankind had suffered through Eve's refusal of God's will. Because of her love of God, she became the mother of Christ and joined him in the battle with the devil, which we will describe later.